After my husband passed away, I bought a new car. Not a big fancy car. Just a small white one. Simple and clean. The kind that says, I am still here. Am still going. The very next morning, my son showed up at my front door without calling first. He walked right past me into the house, picked up my keys from the hook by the door, and dropped them into his coat pocket like they were already his. "You don't need this car, Mom," he said. "You're too old to be driving around alone. Tomorrow I'm going on a trip with Linda's family. I'll drop you off at Sunrise Gardens on the way. You'll love it there." I stood in my own kitchen in my own house, and I could not find words. My mouth opened but nothing came out. He was talking about a nursing home. My son was talking about dropping me off at a nursing home like I was a box he needed to deliver on his way out of town. So I let him go. I let him take the car and drive away. And then I sat down, picked up my phone, and I sent him one message. Just 5 words. "Check the glove box, son." What he found inside that glove box made him pull over so fast his tires left marks on the road. But to understand why I put what I put in there, you need to hear my whole story from the very beginning. My name is Dorothy. I am 68 years old. And for 44 years, I was married to a man named Gerald. Gerald was not a loud man. He was not the type who filled a room with big stories or fancy words. He was quiet and steady like a good clock. He showed up every single day. He fixed things that broke. He held my hand at the doctor's office when the news was not good. He remembered how I liked my coffee, 2 sugars and just a little cream without me ever having to ask. When Gerald got sick 3 years ago, we fought it together. Every hospital visit, every treatment, every hard morning. We held on together for as long as we could. And then one Tuesday in February, on a cold and gray morning, he was gone. The house went quiet in a way that I had never felt before. Not just the normal quiet of a sleeping house. A different kind of quiet. The kind that presses against your chest. The kind that makes every room feel too big. I sat in that quiet for weeks. I barely cooked. I barely went outside. My neighbor Carol brought me food twice a week and I thanked her but barely tasted it. My sister called from 3 states away and cried on the phone with me. But my son Daniel was busy. He had his wife Linda and their life, and I told myself that was fine. That was how it was supposed to be. Children grow up and they go live their lives. Gerald and I always said that. We always said we raised Daniel to be independent, and independent he was. But here is the thing about grief. It does not stay still. It moves through you in waves. Some days are manageable. You make your tea, you water your plants, you watch your shows, and you almost feel like yourself. Other days it hits you like a wall and you have to sit down wherever you are and just breathe through it. I had many of those days in those first months without Gerald. And through all of it, I kept thinking about what Gerald used to say when things got hard. He would put his big warm hand over mine and say, "You are not someone who sits down and gives up. That is not who you are and it never has been." He was right. I had never been someone who gave up easily. I raised Daniel mostly on my own while Gerald worked long hours. I ran the house. I worked part-time at the school library for 20 years. I managed every bill, every appointment, every broken thing that needed fixing when Gerald was away. I was capable. I had always been capable. The grief had just made me forget that for a little while. So one morning I woke up before the sun came up and I just lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and I made myself a promise. I promised myself, and I promised Gerald, that I was not going to disappear into this house and let the rest of my life just slip away. I was going to get up. I was going to keep going. And the first thing I was going to do was get myself a car. Gerald and I had shared one car for many years. A big old blue station wagon that Gerald kept running with duct tape and determination and a lot of love. When Gerald passed, that car passed with him in spirit. It was his car really. Every inch of it smelled like him, and every time I tried to drive it I would start crying at red lights. One morning I just could not do it anymore. I asked my neighbor Carol's husband Roy to drive it to my nephew's house. My nephew was learning to fix cars. He could have it. I did not need the sadness of it sitting in my driveway every morning. What I needed was something new. Something that was mine. Something that did not carry the weight of everything we had lost. Had money saved. Gerald and I had been careful our whole lives. We were not rich people, but we were careful people. We did not spend more than we had. We put a little away every month for decades. When Gerald's life insurance came through and I added it to our savings, I had enough to buy a modest car without worry. I was not going to ask Daniel for permission. I was not going to ask anyone for permission. I was 68 years old, I had a valid license, I had clean eyes and steady hands, and I wanted a car. So one Wednesday morning I drove with Carol to a dealership about 12 miles from my house and I bought myself a car. The man at the dealership was named Marcus. He was young and patient and he did not talk to me like I was confused. I appreciated that more than he probably knew. He showed me several cars and I test drove 2 of them. The second one, a white compact with very good visibility and a backup camera and a little blue button on the dashboard that I thought was just beautiful, that was the one. Felt right when I sat in it. Felt easy and bright and honest. Marcus explained everything to me clearly. The warranty, the gas mileage, how the safety features worked. We went through every detail. I asked good questions and he answered them well. The price was fair. I had done my research at home the night before. I was not walking in blind. When I signed the papers, Marcus smiled and shook my hand and said, "Mrs. Dorothy, you are going to love this car." And I believed him. I drove it home by myself very carefully, on roads I had driven for 30 years. And when I pulled into my driveway in that little white car, I sat there for a moment and I breathed. The new car smell was everywhere. Clean and fresh. Like possibility. Like a door that was just opening. Cried a little. I am not ashamed of that. I cried because Gerald would have loved that car. He would have walked around it 3 times and looked under the hood even though he did not need to, and then he would have smiled at me and said, "Good choice." I could hear his voice so clearly it almost scared me. I wiped my eyes, went inside and called Daniel. Got his voicemail. I left him a cheerful message. I told him I had bought a car and I was doing well and I loved him. I hung up feeling hopeful. That was a Thursday afternoon. The next morning everything changed. I was up early because I had not been sleeping through the night since Gerald passed. Early mornings had become my time. The house was coolest then and the neighborhood was quiet, and I would sit with my coffee at the kitchen table and watch the light come up through the window over the sink. I had plans that morning. Nothing big. I wanted to drive to the pharmacy, pick up my prescription, stop at the garden center and look at some new bulbs for the front bed. Small things. Good things. The kind of ordinary that feels like healing when you have been through loss. I was on my second cup of coffee when I heard a car pull up fast outside. I looked through the window and my chest did something complicated. It was Daniel's car, a dark green SUV. And behind it a second car. Linda's car. Both of them, first thing on a Friday morning, without a single word of warning. I set my coffee cup down and straightened up. Something about the way they had parked told me this was not a casual visit. There was a purposefulness to it. Hurry. I walked to the front door and opened it before they could ring the bell. Daniel was already on the walk. Linda was getting out of her car, smoothing her jacket. Neither one of them was smiling. "Good morning," I said, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt. "This is a surprise. Come in, I'll make more coffee." Daniel walked past me into the house without answering. I closed the door and followed Daniel into the kitchen. He was standing at the counter looking at my new car keys on the hook by the door. He reached out and touched them with one finger, almost like he was testing whether they were real. Linda stood in the doorway with her arms folded. She had a look I knew well. The look she got when she had already decided how something was going to go. "Daniel," I said carefully. "What's going on?" He turned around and looked at me, and there was something in his face that I did not like. Not anger exactly. Something more like the expression of a man who has already rehearsed what he is going to say. "Mom," he said. "I know you bought a car." "Yes," I replied. "I left you a message. I was hoping you'd come see it." He nodded slowly. "I got the message. That's why I'm here." He paused and looked at Linda, and she gave a small nod, like a coach signaling a player. Mom, he said again. You don't need a car. I heard the words. I heard every one of them. But they did not make sense to me at first. What do you mean I don't need a car? I asked. He crossed his arms. You live alone. You don't go far. The pharmacy is 2 miles away. I can order your prescriptions online and have them delivered. Everything you need can come to you. Having a car at your age, driving alone, it's a risk, Mom. And honestly, the money could have been used for something more practical. More practical. I stared at my son. My son who I had brought into this world. Daniel, I said slowly. I am 68 years old. I have had a clean driving record for 50 years. I passed my renewal test last spring with no problems. I bought that car with my own money. My money, Daniel. Money that your father and I saved together for our whole lives. He sighed. It was the kind of sigh that a person does when they think you are missing the point. Mom, it's not about the driving test. It's about what's practical. Safe. Linda and I have been talking and we think it makes more sense to start looking at some options for you. Places where you'd have support, company, people around you all the time. I went very still. What kind of places? I asked even though I already knew. Linda stepped forward and her voice was very smooth when she spoke. She had a smooth way of talking that had always made me feel like I was being managed. There are some wonderful assisted living communities, Dorothy, she said. Sunrise Gardens has a beautiful garden and a very active social calendar. We actually looked at it last week. They had visited a nursing home for me last week without telling me. While I was sitting in this house making my plans and buying my car and trying to put my life back together. They had been visiting facilities. I felt something move through me then. Not just hurt, though it was that too. It was something older and fiercer. A kind of knowing. I understood in that moment that this conversation had been coming for some time. That Daniel and Linda had been building toward this while I was grieving, while I was quiet and soft and easy to manage. They had seen the window of my grief and they had walked right through it. Daniel, I said, and my voice was very quiet now. Are you telling me that you want me to sell my house and move into a facility? We think it's the right thing, he said. And until we get everything sorted, Linda and I need a car for our trip this weekend. We're going up to the lake with her parents. Our car's been making a noise and the mechanic can't see it until next week. Yours is new and it's just sitting there. I looked at my son. I looked at this man that I had nursed through ear infections and helped with homework and cheered for at every school play and drove to every practice and held every time his heart was broken. And I said very clearly, no. He reached out and took the keys off the hook. Mom, he said, don't make this a big thing. Those are my keys, I said. I walked toward him with my hand out. Daniel, give me my keys. Linda stepped in between us, not loudly, just physically, a quiet interference. Dorothy, she said, we'll have it back by Monday. You're not going anywhere this weekend anyway. You don't know what I'm doing this weekend, I said. You didn't ask. Daniel was already walking toward the door. Followed him. Daniel, I am telling you to put those keys back on that hook right now. He stopped at the door with his hand on the knob and he looked back at me with an expression that broke something inside me. It was a tired expression, like I was a problem he was done having the patience for. I'll drop you at Sunrise Gardens on the way, he said. They have a lovely room available. You can stay for the weekend and look around and I really think you'll like it once you see it. I could not breathe. The room felt like it was tilting. My own child was standing in my house with my keys in his hand, telling me he was going to drop me at a nursing home on his way to a vacation. He opened the door. He walked out. Linda followed him with a small apologetic smile that was not really apologetic at all. I stood on my porch and I watched my little white car back out of my driveway with my son at the wheel. And then I went inside, sat down at my kitchen table and picked up my phone. I did not cry right away. The tears came later. First there was just this flat, cold feeling like something had been turned off inside me. I sat there with my phone in my hands and I thought about what had just happened. My son had taken my car. He had talked about putting me in a nursing home. He had looked at me with that tired, impatient look. And Linda, who had never once in 11 years asked me a single question about my life that was not connected to what I owned or what I planned to do with it. They had been planning this. I thought about the last year. The questions that had seemed innocent at the time. Daniel asking about the house value last Christmas. Linda asking me very casually over dinner whether Gerald had had a good policy. The time Daniel suggested I downsize into something smaller. I had thought those were just conversations. I had thought my son was just trying to be practical, trying to be helpful. But sitting there at my kitchen table, I saw all those conversations for what they were. They were steps. They were a plan. And today was supposed to be the day it all came together. Take the car. Suggest the nursing home. Move Dorothy out of the house and into a facility and clear the path to everything Gerald and I had spent our lives building. My hands were shaking slightly, but I was thinking very clearly. 'Cause here is what Daniel did not know. I'd been thinking too. I want to tell you about a woman named Helen. Helen was my friend for 32 years. We met at a church potluck when our boys were in 3rd grade together, and we became the kind of friends who tell each other everything. Helen was sharp and funny, and she could read people the way some people read books. When Gerald first got sick, Helen was there every single week. And when Helen's husband passed 5 years before Gerald, I was there for her. We held each other through our losses the way good friends do. Helen passed away 8 months before Gerald, and I still miss her every day. But before Helen died, she told me something that I wrote down and saved because I knew it was important. We were sitting on her porch one evening and she was already very frail, and she looked at me very directly and said, "Dorothy, I made the mistake of trusting too much. I loved my children and I assumed that love was enough protection. It wasn't. You protect yourself with paperwork, not with love. Love is a feeling. Paperwork is a fact." I had not fully understood what she meant at the time. But after she was gone, after I heard from her daughter how the last year of Helen's life had gone, with her son pushing her to sign things, to move, to give up her house, I understood. I never forgot what Helen said. And when Gerald passed and I started putting my affairs in order, those words were very much on my mind. Gerald was careful with money his whole life, and he had taught me to be careful too. But careful with money is different from careful with protection. I had always been the kind of woman who assumed people meant well. I gave benefit of the doubt. I forgave quickly. Kept the peace. That was my way. Gerald's way was quieter but more solid. He used to say, "It doesn't cost anything to be prepared. If nothing bad happens, you just have some papers in a drawer. If something bad does happen, those papers are the only thing that matters." After Gerald passed, I called his old college friend, Walter. Walter had been a family law attorney for 35 years. He was retired now but still sharp and still kind, and he had known Gerald and me since we were young. I called Walter not because I was suspicious of Daniel specifically. I called because Helen's words were in my head, and because Gerald's voice was in my ear, and because I was 68 and alone, and I was not going to let anything else be taken from me by life or by anyone else. Walter came to my house 2 weeks after Gerald's funeral. We sat at this same kitchen table and we talked for 3 hours. And when we were done, Walter helped me build something I think of now as my foundation. My quiet, solid, invisible foundation. Walter helped me update my will first. It had been years since Gerald and I had updated it, and it needed to reflect my new situation. In the original will, Daniel was set to inherit nearly everything. That had made sense when it was written. At that time, Daniel was a different kind of son than he had slowly become. Walter asked me hard questions about Daniel, about Linda, about the dynamic I had noticed shifting over the years. I told him honestly what I had seen. Questions about money. The suggestions to downsize. Linda's measuring eyes. Walter listened without judging. "Dorothy," he said at the end, "I want you to think very carefully about whether the person you are describing is the person you want to be your primary heir." I thought about it for 2 full weeks. I lost sleep over it. But in the end I knew the answer. Changed the will. I did not cut Daniel out entirely. He would still receive something, enough to know I loved him. But the bulk of what Gerald and I had built together, the house, the savings, the investments, I redirected to causes that mattered to me. The library where I had worked for 20 years. A children's scholarship fund our church ran. An animal rescue organization I had donated to for many years. It hurt to do it. But it was right. Walter also helped me prepare several other very specific documents, and those documents I placed in a manila envelope, and that envelope I placed in the glove box of my new white car the day before Daniel came and took it. The documents Walter helped me prepare were not complicated, but they were powerful. The first was a letter, notarized and official, on Walter's letterhead, stating clearly that the white car was registered solely in my name, that I was of sound mind and body, that my driver's license was current and valid, and that any person operating that vehicle without my explicit written permission was committing the crime of theft. The letter listed the specific legal statutes. It listed the potential penalties. It was not vague. It was not gentle. It was a legal document with teeth. The second document was a letter from my doctor. Dr. Patricia Navarro had been my physician for 14 years. When I told her what I was preparing and why, she did not hesitate. She wrote a detailed letter confirming that I was in excellent health for my age, that my vision was sharp, that my cognition was fully intact, that I had no conditions that would impair my ability to drive or live independently, and that in her professional medical opinion there was absolutely no clinical basis for placing me in any kind of care facility. Dr. Navarro had met Linda once at an appointment, and she had watched how Linda spoke over me and answered questions that were directed at me. She signed that letter with what I felt was particular satisfaction. The third document was the most important one. It was a copy of my updated will. And there was a note attached to it in Walter's handwriting that explained very simply that any attempt to declare me incompetent, to force me from my home, or to place me in a care facility against my will would be treated as elder abuse under state law and would result in immediate legal action, the revocation of any remaining inheritance, and criminal referral to Adult Protective Services. I put all 3 documents in a large envelope. I sealed it. I wrote on the outside in my own handwriting, in big dark letters, "For Daniel only. Open immediately." And I placed it in the glove box of my white car. Part of me hoped I would never have to use it. The morning I put it there, I stood in the driveway and I looked at that little white car and I said out loud, to Gerald, who I believe was somewhere nearby listening, "I hope this never matters. I hope I am being paranoid and Daniel is just my son and everything is fine." But I put the envelope in anyway because Helen had told me to, and because Gerald had always said the same thing in his own way, and because my gut told me to. I locked the car and I went back inside and I made dinner and I watched my shows and I went to bed and I thought, probably nothing will come of this. I was wrong, of course. Completely and entirely wrong. Because the next morning Daniel came. And he took the keys. And he drove away. And then I sat at my kitchen table and I typed those 5 words. "Check the glove box, son." And I pressed send. I set the phone face down on the table. I took a long, slow breath. I thought about Gerald. I thought about Helen. I thought about 44 years of love and work and sacrifice. And then I waited. The first 4 minutes were the longest of my life. I sat at the kitchen table and I did not move. I did not turn the television on. I did not make more coffee. I just sat in the quiet and waited and thought about what Daniel was going to find when he opened that glove box. I pictured him driving on the highway, maybe talking to Linda, maybe already planning out the week. I pictured Linda's voice, confident and smooth, talking about the lake house, talking about Sunrise Gardens, talking about whatever plans they had made about my life without including me in them. And then I pictured Daniel's phone buzzing on the console. 5 words lighting up the screen. "Check the glove box, son." I thought about him reaching over, opening the glove box without slowing down at first, pulling out the envelope, reading the front. "For Daniel only. Open immediately." I thought about what his face looked like when he opened it. When he read Walter's letter. When he read Dr. Navarro's letter. When he saw the will and Walter's handwritten note. I thought about the moment the car slowed down. I imagined it very clearly, the gradual pressure on the brake pedal, the car drifting to the right toward the shoulder of the highway, the hazard lights clicking on. My phone buzzed. I looked at it. Daniel was calling. I did not answer. He called 6 times in a row. I let everyone go to voicemail. Not because I was being cruel. Because I needed him to feel the pause. I needed him to sit in the uncertainty for a little while, the way I had sat in shock in my own kitchen. The way I had stood on my porch watching my car disappear down my street. I needed him to understand that what he had done had consequences. That his mother was not a problem to be managed on the way to a lake house. After the sixth call, a text came through. "Mom, what is this?" Then another one. "Mom, please call me." Then nothing for a few minutes. I sat very still. Then a longer message came through. "Mom, I read everything. I read what Walter wrote. I read the doctor's letter. Mom, I didn't know. Mom, I am so sorry. Please don't call the police. Please. I am pulling over. I am turning around. I am coming home right now." I read the message 3 times. I noticed that he did not say the documents were wrong. He did not say I had overreacted. He did not say the documents were unfair, or that Walter had no business helping me, or that Dr. Navarro's letter was exaggerated. He said he was sorry. He said he was turning around. I put the phone down on the table. I stood up. I went to the kitchen window and I looked out at my empty driveway and I said very softly to Gerald and to Helen both, "You were right. You were both right." I did not reply to Daniel's message right away. I called Walter first. He picked up on the 3rd ring. "Dorothy," he said. "What's happened?" I told him everything quickly and calmly. The morning visit, the keys, the things Daniel had said about the nursing home, the moment I sent the message, the calls I had not answered, Daniel's texts. Walter listened without interrupting until I was done. "And he says he's turning around?" Walter asked. "Yes." "Good," Walter said. "Dorothy, you are in a very strong legal position here. He took the car without permission. That is theft regardless of the family relationship. You have the documentation to support every aspect of your competence, your ownership, and your right to remain in your home. None of that has changed. The question now is how you want to handle the conversation when he arrives." Thought about that. "I want to hear what he has to say," I said. "And I want him to understand what he did. Not just apologize for it, but actually understand it." "That's wise," Walter said. "And if at any point you feel pressured or if Linda is present and the conversation becomes difficult, you call me and I will be there within the hour." "I mean that, Dorothy. Within the hour." I thanked him and hung up. Then I walked to my bedroom and I looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. I was wearing an old house dress and my hair was not done. That was not how I wanted to have this conversation. I opened my closet. I changed into my navy blue slacks and my favorite cream blouse, the one Gerald always said made me look like someone who meant business. I brushed my hair and put in my pearl earrings, the ones Gerald gave me for our 30th anniversary. I put on a little color on my lips. I was not dressing up for Daniel. I was dressing up for myself. Because I was not going to sit across from my son in a worn house dress while I had the most important conversation of our lives. I was going to sit across from him looking exactly like what I was. A woman who knew her own value. While I waited, I made a fresh pot of coffee. I did not eat anything because my stomach was too tight, but I made the coffee because I needed something to do with my hands and because the smell of it was grounding. I sat at the kitchen table and I thought about what I wanted to say. I was not going to yell. I had never been a yeller. Gerald and I had very rarely raised our voices at each other, even in our hardest times. Talk. We said what we meant. I was going to do that now. I was going to say what I meant very clearly and very completely, and Daniel was going to hear every word. 2 hours passed. At some point I heard a car slow down on my street and my whole body went still. But it passed. Not yet. I refilled my coffee and waited. At noon I heard the engine of my own car come up the street. I recognized the sound of it already. New as it was, I had already learned the sound of it. I heard it turn into the driveway. I heard it stop. I heard the engine go off. Then silence for a long time. I did not go to the window. I waited at the table. I heard the car door open and close. Slow footsteps on the walk. A long pause at the front door. Then the doorbell. He used the doorbell. He had a key to my house, had had one for years, but he used the doorbell. Something about that small fact moved through me in a complicated way. Maybe it was shame that made him use the doorbell. Maybe it was the beginning of respect. Maybe it was both. I got up from the table, walked to the door, and opened it. Daniel was standing on the porch with the manila envelope in his right hand and my car keys in his left. He looked terrible. His eyes were red and swollen. His face was pale and drawn. He was still wearing his jacket from the morning, but the collar was askew, like he had been running his hands through his hair, like he had been sitting on the side of that highway for a long time, falling apart before he could drive back. I looked at my son and I felt the pull that mothers always feel, that animal pull toward your child that does not care what they have done. I felt it and I let it be there. And then I stepped back from the door. "Come inside," I said. He came in. I did not hug him. I led him to the kitchen and I pointed to the chair across the table from mine, and I sat down in my chair and I folded my hands on the table in front of me and I waited. He put the envelope and the keys on the table between us. He sat down heavily. He did not look up at me right away. He looked at his own hands for a long moment. Then he said, "Where's Linda?" Yes. He looked up then. "I dropped her at her parents' house. She..." He stopped. "She what?" said. He shook his head slowly. "She said the documents were a bluff. She said you would never actually call the police on your own son. She said I should keep the car and we should still go to the lake." I let that sit in the air between us for a moment. "And what did you think?" asked. He looked down again. "I didn't know what to think," he said. "But I knew I had to come back. Because of the legal documents." asked. "Or because you knew what you did was wrong?" He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I thought maybe he was not going to answer. Then he said very quietly, "Both. And because the whole drive home I kept thinking about Dad. I kept thinking about what Dad would say if he could see what I just did. That was the moment the dam broke. Not for me. For him." Daniel put his face in his hands and he cried. The kind of crying that a grown man does when he has been holding something for too long, rough and ragged, not pretty at all. I sat across the table and I let him cry. I did not reach over and pat his hand. I did not say it was all right because it was not all right. I let him feel the weight of what he had done without lifting it off him before it needed to be lifted. After a few minutes the crying slowed. He wiped his face with the sleeve of his jacket. He looked exhausted and young, which is a strange combination in a 43-year-old man. "Mom," he said, "I don't know how to explain what happened. I don't know how it got to this. A year ago, 2 years ago, I never would have done something like this. Never. When did it start to change?" asked. He thought about it. "I think," he said slowly, "I think it started when Linda started talking about the future. About your house. About how big it was and how it was worth a lot and how eventually, when you were older, it would need to be handled carefully. She made it sound practical. She made it sound like planning. And then somehow I was seeing you differently. I was seeing you as someone to plan for instead of someone to love." He said that last sentence like someone who had just understood something very important for the first time. I let it sit there. "Daniel," I said, "I need to ask you something and I need you to answer me honestly." "Yes," he said. "Did you love that nursing home idea? When you looked at it last week, did you think to yourself my mother would be happy there? Or did you think about the house? About what would happen to it if I wasn't in it?" He was quiet for a very long time. I watched his face carefully. I could see him deciding whether to be honest. I watched him make the decision. "Both," he said at last. "At first it was both. But by the time we drove there this morning it was mostly the house." "Thank you," I said, "for saying that honestly." He looked up sharply. He did not expect that response. "Thank you." "Yes," I said. "Because that honesty is the first real thing you have given me since you walked through my door this morning. The rest of it, the justifications, the concerns about my safety, the talk about what was practical, that was all a story you were telling so you did not have to tell yourself the truth. But just now you told me the truth. And that matters." Daniel swallowed hard. "Mom," he said, "I'm so sorry." "I know you are," I said. But I want you to understand what I need from you going forward, because sorry is a beginning, not an ending. I stood up from the table and I walked to the kitchen window. The driveway was there, my little white car sitting in the sun, mine again. Let me tell you something about your father, I said without turning around. Your father and I were married for 44 years and we never once took something from each other without asking. Not a dollar, not a decision, not a moment. We asked. Talk. We respected each other. That is how a loving relationship works. And the same rule applies between a parent and a child, no matter how old anyone gets. You did not ask me today, Daniel. You informed me. You walked into my house and you told me what I needed and what I didn't need and what was going to happen to me. You took away my choice. That is not what love looks like. I heard him shift in his chair. You're right, he said. I know you're right. Your father built our life together with me, I continued. Not for me, not over me. With me. I was his partner. I had a say in everything. And when he got sick, when it was very hard, he still asked my opinion. He still treated me like a whole person. Not a problem to be solved. I turned around and looked at my son. I am not a problem to be solved, Daniel. I am a 68-year-old woman who is healthy and sharp and capable of making my own decisions about my own life. And anyone who tries to take that from me, including you, is going to find out that I am not as easy to manage as they thought. Daniel looked at the envelope on the table. Those documents, he said. Walter helped you. Yes, I said. How long have you been planning this? He asked. There was no accusation in his voice. Just a kind of wondering. I haven't been planning to do this to you, I said. I've been planning to protect myself. There is a difference. I hoped I would never need those documents. I hoped that the person I raised was not capable of what happened this morning. But I had a dear friend who used to say that you protect yourself with paperwork, not with love. And I finally understood what she meant. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Linda knew about this, didn't she? About Walter and the documents. I would guess that Linda suspected I might have done something to protect myself, yes, I said. I think Linda is a great deal smarter about these things than you give her credit for. But also a great deal more focused on things that should not be her focus. The kitchen was very quiet. Through the window I could see a bird land on my garden fence, peck once at the wood and fly away. I need to ask you something difficult, I said. And you don't have to answer today. But I need you to think about it seriously. Daniel nodded. What kind of marriage do you have, Daniel? Is Linda your partner? Or is she someone you follow? He did not answer right away. I did not expect him to. That was a question that deserved real thought. I think, he said carefully after a long pause. I think somewhere along the way I started letting her make decisions because it was easier. Because she's so confident and she always seems to know what the right thing is. And I. He stopped. And you what? I said gently. I lost track of what I thought, he said. Of what I actually believed. I just started doing what she said because she always had a reason and the reasons made sense, and then one day the reasons were about your house and your car and your future, and I didn't stop to ask myself whether any of it was right. He looked at me directly. I gave myself permission to do something I knew was wrong because someone I trusted gave me a reason that sounded practical. Yes, I said. That is exactly what happened. And I need you to understand that the person most responsible for that is not Linda. You. Linda has always been Linda. I have watched her for 11 years and she has always been a woman who sees value in terms of money. That is who she is. But you are my son. You knew better. And you chose not to use what you knew. There was a long silence. What do I do now? Daniel asked at last. How do I fix this? You start, I said, by going to therapy. Daniel looked surprised. I think he had expected me to give him a list of things to do for me. Chores, visits, apologies, ways to make it up to his mother. He had not expected me to point the work back at him. Therapy, he said. Therapy, I repeated. Because what happened today is not something that started today. It started a long time ago, when you began letting someone else tell you who you were and what you believed. that takes work to undo. Real work. Not a conversation with me over a kitchen table. You need to sit with someone professional and figure out how you got here and how you make sure you never get here again. He was quiet. Will you still be my mom? He asked. And that simple question from a 43-year-old man, landed on me the way a child's fear lands on a mother. Right in the center of the chest. I will always be your mother, I said. But what our relationship looks like from here is going to depend on the choices you make. If you go to therapy, if you genuinely do the work, if you begin to show me through your actions that you understand what happened today and why it was wrong, then we will rebuild. It will take time. But we will rebuild. I picked up the keys from the table. If you choose not to do that, if you go home to Linda and you let her tell you that I am the problem, that I overreacted, that the documents were unfair, and you believe her instead of your own heart, then I will be just fine without you in my life. I have survived losing your father. I can survive anything. Daniel left about an hour after he arrived. He was quiet when he left. Not the brittle, managed quiet of someone who was holding something back. The deeper quiet of someone who had been handed a very heavy truth and was just beginning to feel the weight of it. He hugged me at the door, and this time I let him. It was a brief hug. Careful on both sides. Like two people who had been in an accident together and were not yet sure what the damage was. I watched him walk to the street. He had called a ride to come get him. My car sat in the driveway. His was gone. Linda had the SUV at her parents' lake house. I thought about Linda sitting somewhere up there, comfortable, certain that this would all be sorted out in my son's favor. I thought about her face when Daniel came back to her without the car, without me having been delivered to Sunrise Gardens, with a story about legal documents and a notarized will and a doctor's letter and a wife who was not at all the confused old woman she thought she was managing. I was not cruel enough to enjoy that image for long, but I was honest enough to let myself enjoy it for a moment. Then I went inside. I sat down at the kitchen table. I placed my hands flat on the surface, the same table where Gerald and I had eaten breakfast together for 30 years, and I let the whole day move through me. The shock of the morning, the cold minutes on the porch, the waiting, the phone calls I did not answer, the conversation with my son and everything that got said and everything that might be different now. I called my sister Frances that evening. Frances lived in Tucson and she was 5 years younger than me, and she had never particularly liked Linda, which she had stated plainly and repeatedly for 11 years. When I told her what had happened, she was furious. The kind of furious that someone gets when they have been waiting a long time for their worry to be confirmed. Dorothy Louise, she said, which is what she called me when she was either very proud or very angry. I have been saying for 3 years that something was off. 3 years. Do you remember what I told you at Thanksgiving? You told me to watch the money conversations, I said. I told you to watch the money conversations, she confirmed. Because Linda talks about money the way other people talk about the weather. It's just always there in every discussion. I noticed it at dinner. Every single topic somehow found its way to what something was worth or what it cost or what it would eventually be valued at. You were right, I said. I know I was right. I love you, and I love Daniel, but he needs to grow a spine. I laughed. It was the first real laugh I had had all day, and it felt like releasing a pressure valve. Frances could always do that. Even in the worst moments she could make me laugh. We talked for 2 hours. She offered to come out and visit and I told her yes, please come. We made a plan for the following month. When I hung up, I felt the particular warmth of being truly known by someone. Frances had known me my whole life. She remembered me at 6 years old. She remembered me at 18 and at 30 and at 50. She knew all the versions of me and she loved them all. I slept that night, but not deeply. I kept waking up in the dark with my thoughts moving fast and complicated. I thought about Daniel in whatever quiet space he had found that night, sitting with everything I had said to him. I thought about whether he would choose truth or comfort. Whether he would go to therapy or go to Linda and let her smooth it all over with her confident explanations. I thought about what I would do if he chose Linda's version of events. And I found, to my genuine surprise, that I was not as frightened of that possibility as I would have been a year ago. A year ago, the thought of losing Daniel would have been devastating. He was all I had left. The last thread to the family Gerald and I had built together. But lying there in the dark, I realized that what I was afraid of was not the same as what was real. The real Daniel, the one who had stood in my kitchen that morning with his hands in his pockets and my keys in his fist, that Daniel had already done something devastating. He had already broken the thing I was afraid of losing. What was left to lose? Only the hope that he could become better. And that was his choice to make, not mine to protect him from. 2 days passed with no word from Daniel. I did not reach out either. I used those 2 days well. I drove my white car to the pharmacy and picked up my prescription. I drove to the garden center and spent a very happy 2 hours choosing bulbs for the front bed. I drove to Carol's house and sat in her kitchen for an hour and told her what had happened and let her be properly outraged on my behalf. Carol was a good friend for outrage. She had a gift for it. She could be outraged with complete commitment while also somehow being calming at the same time. "What you did," she said, tapping the table with one finger for emphasis. "The glove box, the documents, the whole thing. Dorothy, that was brilliant. That was absolutely brilliant. Gerald would have been so proud." "That's what I keep hoping," I said. "He would have laughed," Carol said. "You know how Gerald was when he was proud of you. He would get that quiet little smile and he would not say much, but the smile would just stay there all day." She was right. That was exactly what Gerald would have done. I drove home that evening feeling something I had not felt in a long time. Not just better but rooted. Like I had reached down and found the ground under my feet and confirmed that it was solid. On the 3rd day Daniel called. Answered this time. His voice was different. Quieter and more careful, like someone moving through a room they were not sure was safe. "Mom," he said. "I found a therapist. I have an appointment on Thursday." I sat with that for a moment. "I'm glad," I said. "I want to tell you something," he said. I told Linda what happened. Everything. The documents, the will, Walter's letter. Everything. And, said. There was a pause. She was angry. She said you were being dramatic. She said Walter had no business interfering in our family. "What did you say?" asked. Another pause, longer this time. "I told her she was wrong," Daniel said. "I told her that what she had convinced me to do was wrong, and that I understood that now, and that if we were going to be married for the rest of our lives, she needed to understand that my mother was not a resource to be managed. That she was a person. My person. And that treating her as anything else was not something I was willing to do anymore." I held the phone very carefully, the way you hold something fragile. "How did she take that?" asked. "Not well," Daniel said. "But that's something she and I need to work through. That's on us. I just needed you to know that I said it. That I meant it." "Thank you, Daniel," I said softly. "That matters to me." We talked for almost an hour that afternoon. We talked about Gerald, which we had not done since the funeral. Daniel told me things he remembered about his father that I had not known. A conversation they had at a baseball game when Daniel was 14. A letter Gerald had written him on his 18th birthday. Small moments that fathers and sons have that wives and mothers do not always see. I told him things about Gerald too. About who Gerald had been before Daniel was born. About our early years together, how poor we were, how happy we were despite it. How Gerald once drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to bring me flowers because I had a hard week and he had heard it in my voice over the phone. Daniel listened to all of it. It felt like something was being repaired, slowly, carefully, with the right tools. Before we hung up he said, "Mom, I want to ask you something. When you're ready. Not now, not yet. But when you're ready, could I come see the car? Could you show me the car?" Smiled. "When you've been to your therapy appointment," I said. "And you can tell me honestly that you're doing the work. And yes, you can come see the car." "Okay," he said. "Okay, Mom." After I hung up I sat in my living room in the armchair by the window where the afternoon light came in at that angle Gerald always liked, and I breathed. Just breathe. I want to tell you about something that happened the following week that I had not expected. I got a letter in the mail. A real letter in an envelope with a stamp. Handwritten. I did not recognize the handwriting. I opened it at the kitchen table with my morning coffee. It was from a woman named Beverly. Beverly was the daughter of my friend Helen, the one I told you about, the one who had told me to protect myself with paperwork. Beverly had heard through our mutual church friends some version of what had happened with Daniel. She had written to me 3 pages, handwritten in a clear and steady script. She told me about what had happened with her own mother, with Helen, in the last year of Helen's life. About how her brother had done very similar things. About how Helen had not been prepared, had not had the documents, had not had a Walter. About how Beverly had fought hard and mostly failed to protect her mother from choices that were made over her head. And then Beverly wrote this sentence, which I have since written in my journal and will keep forever. She wrote, "My mother told you to protect yourself with paperwork and you listened. She would have been so happy to know that. She used to say you were the sharpest woman she knew." I sat at my kitchen table and I cried for Helen. I cried for Beverly. I cried for all the women who had not had a Walter, who had not had a Gerald's voice in their ear, who had not listened to the right advice at the right time. And then I picked up my pen and I wrote Beverly back. Beverly and I began writing back and forth. Real letters, which is a pleasure I had forgotten about in the age of phone calls and texts. Her letters were warm and thoughtful and funny in places. She told me about her life in the town 2 hours from mine. Her garden, her grandchildren, her part-time work at a veterinary clinic that she loved. She told me about her own experience with loneliness after her divorce 8 years prior and how she had rebuilt herself, slowly, with a lot of stubbornness and a good book club. I told her about Gerald, about the car, about Daniel's slow movement toward something better, about the bulbs I had planted in the front bed which were just beginning to show their first green tips. We exchanged 5 letters over the following 3 weeks. And then Beverly drove to my town to have lunch. We met at a small Italian place near the library where I used to work. I recognized her immediately. She had Helen's eyes and Helen's direct way of holding herself. We hugged in the parking lot like women who had known each other for a long time, even though we had only been writing for a month. We sat at a table by the window and ordered pasta and talked for 3 hours. She told me that she thought of me as a continuation of her mother in some ways. "Mom loved you," she said. "She talked about you all the time. She said you were the kind of woman who made other women feel like they could handle things." I was quiet for a moment. "I didn't always feel that way," I said. "None of us do," Beverly said. "That's what makes it worth saying." Over the following weeks Daniel went to therapy. He called me after each session, not to report what was discussed, just to check in. The calls were short at first. "I'm going. It's hard. I'll keep going." But gradually they got longer. He started talking about things he was realizing, about patterns he had not seen in himself, about the way he had been trained from a young age to smooth things over and avoid conflict and follow the most confident voice in the room. He was doing the work. Could hear it. I was not ready to fully trust it yet. Trust is not rebuilt in a month. But I was watching and I was cautiously, carefully hopeful. Linda was harder. I heard about her mostly through Daniel and through the careful silences in what Daniel said. She had agreed to couples therapy but reluctantly. She was, according to Daniel, finding it difficult to accept that her approach had been wrong. That did not surprise me. People who have been operating from a place of certainty for a long time do not find it easy to sit with uncertainty. But Daniel was holding the line. That was what mattered. He was holding the line in a way he had never held it before. Something had cracked open in him the day he drove back down that highway with the envelope in his lap and the knowledge of what he had done riding with him. And whatever came through that crack, it was real. I could hear it in his voice. Gerald would have recognized it. That is what I kept thinking. Gerald would have recognized it. One evening in the 5th week after everything happened, I was sitting on my front porch in the evening when my neighbor Roy came over to lean on the fence post and talk the way neighbors do. Roy was in his early 70s, broad and calm, with a white beard and the unhurried manner of a man who has stopped trying to rush anything. He had known Gerald well. They used to stand in the driveway together on Saturday mornings talking about nothing in particular for 30 minutes at a time, the way men of their generation did. Roy said, "I saw the new car. Gerald would have made you show him the engine." "I know," I said. "He would have kicked the tires," Roy said. "Even though there's nothing you can learn from kicking a tire. He just liked doing it," I said. Roy chuckled. "He was a good man. He was the best I ever knew," I said honestly. Roy was quiet for a moment, looking down the street. Then he said, "You seem different these days, Dorothy." "Good different. Like something settled in you." "Thought about that." "I think something did settle," I said. "I think I figured out who I am when I am not being a wife or a mother. I think I figured out that person is still pretty good." Roy smiled. "Gerald always said you were the strong one." "He was wrong about a lot of things," I said. "But not that." 6 weeks after Daniel took the car, he came to visit. He called ahead. He arrived at the time he said he would. He brought flowers, not expensive ones, just the cheerful yellow kind from the supermarket that are unpretentious and honest. He stood at the door and he did not come in until I invited him, even though he had a key. These were small things. But small things add up to something. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where the hard conversation had happened, and we had a different kind of conversation. We talked about his therapy, which he was still going to. We talked about his marriage, carefully, with me listening more than advising. We talked about Gerald. We talked about the future, not the part where I was a resource to be distributed, but the part where I was a living person with plans and interests and a life to keep living. "I want to be part of your life, Mom," Daniel said. "Not to manage it. Just to be in it." "Then be in it," I said simply. "Show up. Call when you don't need anything. Ask questions you actually want to know the answers to. That's what being in someone's life looks like." He nodded. "I can do that." "I know you can," I said. "I raised you. I know what you are capable of when you decide to actually be it." After he left, I stood in the doorway and watched him drive away. Then I turned and looked at my house. My house, Gerald's and mine. A few days later, I did something I had been thinking about for a while. I drove to the library, the one where I had worked for 20 years, where I knew every corner and every shelf and the particular way the afternoon light came through the west windows in autumn. I walked in and the smell of it hit me the way it always did, paper and quiet and possibility. The head librarian, a woman named Suzanne who had started there when I was already a veteran, looked up from the desk and her face lit up. "Dorothy," she said, "I was hoping you'd come back." We hugged over the desk. I asked her how things were. She told me about the new programs they were running, a literacy circle for adults, a story time for toddlers, a conversation group for seniors on Thursday afternoons. "We're short on volunteers," she said. "We could really use someone who knows how this place works. Who loves it the way it deserves to be loved." I looked around the library. At the children in the reading corner. At the older man with his newspaper. At the teenager with headphones studying at a table by the window. "When do I start?" said. Suzanne laughed like I had given her a gift. "I started the following Thursday. I led the Thursday afternoon conversation group for seniors. We talked about books and about our lives and about things that mattered. There were 7 of us the first week. By the 3rd week there were 14. The conversation group became the best part of my week. Every Thursday afternoon I drove my white car to the library, parked in the same spot, walked through the same door, and sat down with people who had stories. Real long lived-in stories. There was a woman named Miriam who had been a teacher for 40 years and had opinions about absolutely everything. There was a man named Thomas who had served in the Navy and had traveled to places I had only seen in books. There was a woman named Gloria, just a year older than me, who had recently moved to town to be near her daughter and was lonely in a way that she tried to hide but could not quite manage. I recognized that loneliness. I had worn it myself. I made a point of arriving early each Thursday so that when Gloria came in I could already be there. So she would walk in and see a familiar face. Sometimes that is all a person needs to feel less alone. A familiar face that has already chosen to be there. These were my people. Not because we had a lot in common on paper. We were different ages, different backgrounds, different histories. But we were all people who had lived long enough to understand that life was not simple and that wisdom did not come cheap and that the best thing you could do with a hard-won lesson was share it. I told them about Gerald one Thursday. Not the whole story, just pieces of it. How we had met. How he had asked me to dance at a party when I was 22, and I had said yes mostly because he looked like a man who would not step on my feet. How I was right. I did not tell them about Daniel, not at first. That story felt too raw, too personal, too tangled with love and betrayal in a combination that was hard to present cleanly. But one Thursday about 2 months in, Miriam brought it up, not about me specifically but about the general subject. She had been reading something in the newspaper about elder abuse and financial exploitation, and she brought it to the group and said, "This is happening everywhere and we need to talk about it." And then for 2 hours we did. We talked about it with the particular frankness that comes when everyone in the room is old enough to be at risk, old enough to have seen it happen to someone. Gloria told us about her sister, who had signed over her house to her son and then spent her last years with no security. Thomas told us about a friend at his old church whose children had fought over the estate before he was even gone. Miriam said, "The worst part is that it's always family. It's never strangers. The strangers who steal from old people we expect. It's the family that breaks you." I was quiet through most of it. But at the end, when we were gathering our things to go, Gloria touched my arm and said, "Dorothy, you seem like you have something to say about this." I looked at her. And then I told them the story. The whole thing. The group was very still when I finished. Not the uncomfortable still of people who don't know what to say. The attentive still of people who have heard something true. Miriam was the first to speak. "The glove box," she said, with a satisfaction in her voice that I recognized as a fellow woman who had planned ahead. "The glove box. Dorothy, that is the smartest thing I have ever heard." There was laughter. The warm, knowing laughter of people who understood exactly what I had done and why. Thomas shook his head with a half smile. "Your husband had a good lawyer friend," he said. "And you had the sense to use him." "My husband always said to be prepared," I said. "And my dear friend Helen, may she rest in peace, said to protect yourself with paperwork." "She was right," Gloria said quietly. "She was completely right." After the meeting, several people came and talked to me one-on-one. 3 of them asked for Walter's name, not because they were in immediate trouble, but because they understood now that being prepared was not paranoia. It was wisdom. It was love for yourself. It was the most practical thing an older person living alone could do. I called Walter that evening and told him I had been something of an informal advertisement for him, and he laughed, which was not something Walter did often. "Send them my way," he said. "Happily." 3 months after the day Daniel drove away with my keys, I took a trip. I had been planning it for weeks. I did not tell Daniel about it until I was already gone, not to be secretive, but because I wanted to do it entirely for myself without it becoming a family event or a source of concern or a conversation about whether it was safe. I drove north. I had never been to the northern coast of this state, which is a remarkable fact given that I have lived here for my entire life. Gerald always talked about wanting to drive up there, through the tall trees, along the cliffs. We never got to it. There was always something. Now there was nothing stopping me. I packed a bag, put it in the trunk of my white car and drove. Took 5 hours. For the first 2 hours I had the radio on, old songs that I knew every word to. For the last 3 hours I drove in silence because the landscape was changing into something worth paying full attention to. The trees got taller and closer together. The sky changed, cooler and more dramatic. And then the coast appeared, and I was not prepared for how beautiful it was. The cliffs dropping straight down into dark blue water, the wind coming in off the ocean in long steady waves, the sound of everything. I pulled over at a spot where other cars had stopped before me, worn tracks in the gravel, and I got out and I stood at the railing and I looked out at the Pacific Ocean and I said out loud, "Gerald, I made it." I stayed for 3 days. I found a small motel that smelled of salt air and good wood. The owner was a woman in her 60s named Sandy, who ran the place by herself since her husband had retired to Florida. We talked over breakfast the first morning and she said, "Traveling alone, and I said, "Yes, and I love it." She nodded with deep understanding. "First time?" Yes. "Oh no," she said. "I've been the only one here for 6 years. Takes some getting used to, but then you can't imagine it any other way." Over those 3 days I walked on trails through the trees. I sat on benches looking at the water. I ate dinner alone at a restaurant with a window table where the ocean was visible in the distance, and I ordered whatever I wanted without consulting anyone, and I ate every bite. I read half a book. I slept without an alarm. I went to sleep when I was tired and woke up when I was rested, and in between I breathed ocean air and felt, for the first time in a very long time, that time was something I could afford to spend. On the second evening I found a small stone on the beach. Dark gray, smooth, exactly the size of a palm. Kept it. Not as a memorial, not as a symbol, just because it was beautiful and I wanted it, and that was reason enough. I put it in my coat pocket and carried it home. When I got back, there was a message from Daniel saying he had called and missed me. I called him back from my driveway, still in my coat with the stone in my pocket. "Where were you?" he asked. "The northern coast," I said. "The tall trees and the cliffs." There was a pause. "How was it?" he asked. "Beautiful," I said. "Everything your father always said it would be." Another pause. Then, "Mom, I'm glad you went." "So am I," I said. "Daniel, I'm going to go get cleaned up. I'll call you later this week." "Okay," he said. "Mom, I love you." "I love you too," I said. And I meant it. Love is not cancelled by betrayal. It is complicated by it, changed by it, but not cancelled. What was cancelled was my willingness to let love be used as an excuse for bad behavior. That was different. That was the thing that was gone for good. I went inside and made tea and sat in Gerald's chair for the first time since he had died. I had not been able to sit in it before. It had always felt like it was still his. But sitting there that evening, with a stone from the coast in my hand and the memory of the ocean still in my bones, it felt like I was sharing the chair rather than taking it. Like Gerald had made room for me there, the way he always had. I want to tell you what I have learned. Not because I think you need to be told, but because when you have been through something hard and come out the other side of it, there is a natural impulse to make it mean something. To make sure the hardness was not just hard but also useful. What I have learned is this. Being old does not mean being finished. It means you have more information than younger people do, which if you use it well is actually an advantage. I had 68 years of information about how people behave, what matters, what is not, how to read a situation, how to plan quietly. I used that information. And it worked. What I have also learned is this. Loving someone with your whole heart does not require you to accept everything they do. I loved Daniel with my whole heart, and I also told him clearly that what he did was wrong and that there would be consequences. Both of those things were true at the same time. That is not a contradiction. That is what healthy love looks like. And what I have learned about grief is this. Grief does not end. It becomes different. It becomes smaller and then larger again and then smaller. It moves in and out of you like weather. But underneath it, if you are paying attention, there is still yourself. Still the person who was there before the loss. And that person, even at 68, even alone, even in a house too quiet on certain evenings, that person is worth taking care of. I drive my white car to the library every Thursday. I write letters to Beverly once a week. I call Francis on Sundays. I visit Gerald's grave when I feel the need to talk to him, which is often. I am working on the front garden and it is looking very good this spring. The bulbs I planted are doing well. I see Daniel once or twice a month. He is still in therapy and the change is real. Linda is. Linda. I do not think she will ever be warm toward me. But she is no longer hostile and she has, according to Daniel, begun to understand that her ideas about my house and my money were not appropriate. Whether that understanding comes from genuine growth or simply from knowing about the will and the documents, I do not entirely know. I suppose it does not matter as long as the behavior is decent. Walter checks in by phone once a month, not because anything requires it, but because we have become friendly in that particular way that happens sometimes between a lawyer and a client when the circumstances are serious and both people bring their full selves to it. My car is 9 months old now. The glove box holds the small stone from the coast, a map that I like having even though I have GPS, a photo of Gerald from a summer trip we took 20 years ago, and a pen. The documents are in my house in a fireproof box that Walter helped me organize. Everything I need where I need it, clear and ready. I want to say something directly to anyone listening who recognizes themselves in this story. Not in me but in Daniel. In the person who let someone else convince them that a parent or a grandparent or an older person they loved was a problem to be managed. I want to say, it is not too late. Daniel was 43 years old and he had done something genuinely wrong and he chose to face it honestly and do the work to change. That took courage. More than people give it credit for. It is one of the hardest things a person can do, to be told clearly and directly that they have failed someone they love and to accept that instead of defending against it. Daniel accepted it. He sat in that kitchen chair and he let me say what I needed to say, and he did not make excuses that were bigger than his accountability. If you have let someone talk you into disrespecting an older person in your family, it is not too late. Go back. Say what needs to be said. Do the work. The older person in your life may or may not be ready to receive you. That is their right. But you make the attempt anyway. Not for the inheritance, not for the peace of your conscience, but because they deserve to hear that you know what you did and that you are trying to be different. And to anyone listening who is an older person who sees themselves in me, I want to say this. You are not wrong to protect yourself. You are not paranoid. You are not unloving. Loving someone does not mean giving them access to everything you have worked your whole life to build. Protecting yourself legally is not an act of war. It is an act of wisdom. It is, in its own way, an act of love because it prevents a situation where someone you love does something they cannot take back, something that damages your relationship permanently, something that harms them as much as it harms you. If I had not put those documents in that glove box, Daniel might have driven away to his lake house, and nothing would have stopped the momentum of what he and Linda had planned. By the time he came back, who knows how far things might have gone. The documents stopped it. The documents gave him a reason to stop, a structure that said here is the wall. Here is what happens if you do not turn around. And it gave him a way to turn around without simply capitulating out of fear. He came back because of those documents and he changed because of what they represented. A mother who knew her own value and had the wisdom to protect it. My friend Helen did not get to have this ending. That stays with me. She told me the right thing to do and she did not manage to do it herself. And she paid a price for that in the last years of her life that she deserved not to pay. I carry that with me as a kind of responsibility. A responsibility to use what I have been given well. The wisdom that came from her. The legal protection that came from Walter. The love that came from Gerald, which taught me over 44 years what respect between people actually looks like and how to recognize its absence. I have been thinking lately about what I want to do with the next chapter. Beverly suggested I might write some of this down. She said, "Dorothy, you have a way of explaining things that makes people feel less alone." I am considering it. Not a book necessarily, nothing so ambitious. But maybe just a record. For myself, for Daniel someday, for anyone who might find it useful. Francis says I should call it a memoir, but I am not sure I have the ego for a memoir. Gerald would have laughed at that. He always said I had too much ego in the wrong places and not nearly enough in the right ones. He was probably correct. Life is long and then it is short, and the trick, I think, is not to wait until it is short to start living it properly. I spent many years being very good at being for other people. Gerald, Daniel, my students at the library, my neighbors, my church community. I was very present for all of them. And that is not a mistake, I do not regret a moment of it. But I was not as present for myself. I did not ask often enough what I wanted, what I needed, where I wanted to go, what kind of person I wanted to keep becoming. The grief of losing Gerald was terrible. But it was also, in a way I am still learning to name properly, a door. A door into myself that had been closed for a long time, not by anyone else, not by Gerald or Daniel, but by my own assumption that other people's needs were simply more important than mine. I do not believe that anymore. I believe that my needs and the needs of the people I love are equally important. I believe that taking care of myself is not selfish. It is what makes it possible for me to actually be there for other people in a meaningful way. You cannot pour from an empty cup, which is something people say so often it has become a little worn, but that does not make it less true. The Thursday conversation group at the library has become something I feel proud of. Last month we had 19 people. Suzanne told me it is the most attended senior program the library has ever run. I think that is partly because we do not pretend. We do not sit around and talk about pleasant things exclusively to fill the time. We talk about real things. About loss and family and money and health and fear and hope and what it means to keep going when going is hard. People come back because they feel heard. That is the whole thing, really. That is all any of us want, at any age, in any room. To say what is true and have someone hear it without flinching. 2 weeks ago, a woman named Patricia came for the first time. She was 71, recently widowed, and she sat in the circle with her hands folded very carefully in her lap, and she listened without saying anything for the whole hour. At the end, as we were putting on our coats, she found me at the door and she said quietly, "I think my daughter is doing something similar to what you described. About the money and the house." I gave her Walter's number. I also gave her my own. "Call me," I said. "Anytime. We'll figure it out together." She called 3 days later. We talked for 2 hours. She is now working with Walter on her own set of documents. Her glove box equivalent. Daniel came over last week for dinner. Just the two of us, which has not happened since before Gerald got sick. He brought food from a restaurant because he knows I did not raise him to come empty-handed, and he wanted to show that he remembered. We sat at the kitchen table and we ate and we talked, and it was not perfect. The way things that are being rebuilt are never quite perfect. There are rough edges, careful pauses, moments where one of us starts to say something and then recalibrates. But underneath the imperfection there was something real. Something that felt like the beginning of what we could be to each other if we both kept working at it. At the end of the evening, as he was putting on his jacket in the hallway, he stopped in front of the photo on the wall, the one of Gerald and me at our 40th anniversary party, both of us laughing at something that someone had said just before the picture was taken. "We look very happy in that photo." We were. "He was a good man," Daniel said. "The best," I said. Daniel turned and looked at me. "I'm going to be better," he said. Not as a promise he was asking me to hold him to. Just as a statement of intent. The kind you make when you mean it and you know it is going to require work and you are ready to do the work anyway. "I know," I said. And I believed him. Here is where I am now. It is a Tuesday morning and the light is coming through my kitchen window at exactly the angle it always has, the angle I have been watching for 30 years. And I am drinking my coffee with 2 sugars and just a little cream, and I am thinking about what Gerald said in that letter. That when I finally believed in my own strength, the whole world was going to tremble. The world did not tremble exactly. But my son stopped his car on the side of a highway and turned around. A woman named Patricia is protecting herself. A conversation group of 19 people is talking honestly about real things every Thursday afternoon. Beverly is driving down to visit me next month, and we are going to cook together and walk and talk about Helen and remember her the way she deserved to be remembered. The stone from the coast is in my glove box. Car is in my driveway. The house is mine. My life is mine. And I am, at 68, finally, clearly, and without apology, living it for myself. If this story reached you somewhere true, somewhere you needed it to reach, I am glad. You deserve to live your life fully too. You deserve to be treated with dignity. You deserve to take up the space that was made for you in this world and to fill it completely, not apologetically, not quietly, but with every bit of yourself that you have. My name is Dorothy, and I am only just getting started. Thank you for listening. This is Granny's voice.